It's been a long day, 2 long days, and this is the last session. I hope we're not yet tired. I'm going to try, thanks for inviting me and all the other speakers. I want to say that as an academic, I'm used to learn from my students, and it's been a pleasure to learn from the younger generation here. And I'm very glad that we have all of them here. Now, I want to divide my presentation to 2 parts. The first part is the past, and I'll go back 1,000 years. And that's easy, because I'm a historian. The next part is the next 10 years. And that's very difficult because I'm a historian and I'm not used to speak about the future, but about the past. But we must speak about the future. So the first part is about the convivencia in Al-Andalus. And I'm glad to speak about it in Spain. Why am I going back 1,000 years? Because what we are asking people to do when we talk about a one state, and I think we've just heard Victor talk about the difficulties, is to try something that was never tried before. First of all, I don't believe there are lots of democratic states on this earth. And to be a proper democracy is bad enough. Secondly, to do it in Palestine after a century of crimes by Zionism is making it almost impossible to even think about it. So what we're trying to do is so difficult that we better think very carefully if there are any examples in history that help us to work it out. And I think the convivencia period of between 600 and 800 years, between 711, when the Muslim conquest of Spain starts, and 1492, when the Muslims and the Jews are ejected as a result of the Reconquista, is a very long period. It's much longer than any other period in history that we can discuss. Okay? When you think about the Renaissance, it didn't take 800 years. When you think about the periods of the Dark Ages, they were shorter than 800 years. So to have the convivencia for such a long time, for hundreds of years, yeah, you can argue that it didn't last 800 years because there were breaks, but it lasted hundreds of years. So that's the first thing to remember. Secondly about the convivencia, everything that we know about the period is unprecedented and incredible. And I will spend 5 minutes trying to persuade you if you are not already knowledgeable about it. In the period between 711 and 1492, Europe is one of the worst places to live in. It is a religious, mad society. It's a society that burned the texts of its precedents. If you think today how important the Roman and Greek documents, plays, poems, histories are to Europe, and they are the classics of European culture, they were burnt by the Christian church well before 711. I'll give you just one simple fact. In the great library of Cordoba, the library of the Caliph, and there was no shortage of libraries in Cordoba. There were 71 libraries in Cordoba, more than in the rest of the world put together. In the library of the Caliph in Cordoba, there were 1,000 times more books than in the rest of Europe. Think about it. And the books that were in Europe, few hundred books in the whole of Europe, were in monasteries that none of the monks actually spoke Greek or could understand the old books that survived the burning of the books by the churches. The reason we have those books today is because the Muslim libraries, A, kept them, B, studied them in the universities of Al-Andalus, and C, most importantly, translated them into what was called vulgar languages, like Arabic. And of course, the new language of Al-Andalus, which was not the language of the population that was living there before, the Castilian language itself is a product of Al-Andalus and the 3 religious communities that were living there. Castellano was produced by the people of Al-Andalus, and you know, Jewish communities that were ejected out of Al-Andalus spoke Castellano, they call it Ladino. Ladino is Old Castellano, the original Castellano of 1500. Yeah? So this is a product of the life together. What were the other products? Well, they were almost all the plays produced in Athens that survived in Al-Andalus. They were available partly in Greek and partly in Arabic translation. All the Roman plays that survived in Al-Andalus. All the books of Plato, of Aristotle, we would not be able to read them today if they did not exist in the libraries of Al-Andalus. They preserved the mathematics, the physics, the medicine, the astronomy, the philosophy, the poetry. If it is called culture, it survived Al-Andalus. Anything which today is crucial for Europe actually was provided by the rulers of Al-Andalus that were Muslim Arabs and Jews and Christians that lived with them in harmony. So what we have in Al-Andalus is an incredible, rare event that lasted hundreds of years. And we have a life together that produced the most amazing cultural benefits, without which the Renaissance does not exist. Without which Columbus will never find his way anywhere. Yeah? Because he wouldn't have the astronomy, he wouldn't have the charts, he wouldn't have anything to lead them neither to India nor to the Caribbean islands. He wouldn't have crossed the ocean successfully. And the same about Vasco da Gama and the other famous travelers. Not to talk about the fact that the clock, the device of finding out where you are on the planet, was preserved by the Arabs and Muslims. So what we're talking about is not only a society of science, a society of culture, a society which is very modern, but we're talking about a society that made the benefit of the three religions, the three cultures, rather than use identity against parts of that society. And the Muslims who took over Spain at the time in 1711 understood that. And that was never understood by any European colonial power. Every European colonial power has destroyed every society they arrived at. Think about Mexico. Think about Peru. Think about anywhere else in North America. The West has specialized in destruction, and Israel is the best example of the West. Israel is a chaos engine, an engine of chaos, destruction, and death, which has perfected the colonial mission of the West to the best abilities. Now, what I'm also, and I'll end with this, about Al-Andalus. What I'm also saying is that one of the areas, and I've already talked about the language, the first major event of cultural translation. I don't mean just language translation. I'm talking about translating between cultures, yeah? Transcultural translation is happening in two centers, both of them Muslim. The center of the Muslim world in Baghdad at the time, between the 8th century and indeed much later, until it is destroyed by people from the east. And if you want, the east is Baghdad, the west is Cordoba, and the other cities of Al-Andalus. And between those two, there is a convivencia between Jews, between Muslims, and between Christians everywhere. In North Africa, in the islands of the Mediterranean, in Turkey, in Greece, in the south of Italy, in Sicily, in the north of Africa, in Arabia, in Palestine itself. The convivencia lives 2,000 years until Zionism arrives, and only disturbed once during the Crusades, when the Crusaders killed 60,000 citizens of Jerusalem, and they killed the Muslims, and they killed the Jews, and they killed the Christians, because the Christians have done something terrible. They lived with Jews and Muslims, and they should die. So that's what we're talking about. This is how unusual this cultural event of hundreds of years is. And I think I'm talking about it because that's what we need. We need something of that amplitude. We need something of that momentous size and type, because anything short of that will not be able to erase the genocide that Israel has now created for the world. And I want to come to the next part of my presentation. The genocide that we are talking about is not a very usual thing. Just one thing about the convivencia, because I think it's really beautiful and I forgot to mention it. Talking about languages. You would know about Maimonides, very important philosopher, not just for Judaism, and a very great follower of Greek philosophy, and especially of Plato. Now, Maimonides knew a whole number of languages. And obviously, he spoke and wrote in Castellano, in Hebrew, and in Arabic. These were the three languages of Spain at the time. But what he did invent, and this is really interesting, he would write Hebrew text in Arabic characters, and then he would write Arabic text in Hebrew characters. What is this about? Is this just a joke? Is this a game? No, I want to argue that this is his way of expressing the intimacy between the communities, because that intimacy was very deep between the three communities. And that is what the Muslims, only the Muslims rulers understood. I'm Jewish. I don't have, a torch to carry from Islam. But I want to tell you, and I want to remind you, that this has happened only under Muslim rule. While Europe was destroying the Muslims and the Jews that it found, everywhere they found, while they were destroying the third world, while they were burning the third world, the Muslim rulers of, for example, the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire, were very liberal. They invited the Jews and the Muslims from Spain in 1492 to come to the Turkish Empire. And that was a great thing for the empire, because these people were the front of science, the front of modernity. So they did not lose. So I want to go back to what we are now facing, and very briefly. What did we see in the last 2 years? We saw first the most public, technological, televised, shared, and global genocide. There never was a genocide that was shared like that. The Nazis killed a lot of people. Don't forget that, and don't get me confused. They killed probably the same number of people that the Europeans killed in North America and Central America combined. In other words, between 15 and 25 million. Nobody knows the exact number. But they didn't do song and dance about it. They didn't advertise it. They didn't say that this is done as a result of anti-Semitism. Yeah? They kept it a secret. Why? Because they knew it's a crime. They understood, even the Nazis understood, that genocide is a crime. The Israelis don't understand that. They don't admit that they have done anything wrong. This is new. This is the most sadistic, most traumatic genocide in history. Think about 2 million, 0.3 people, 1.2 million children, well, now less. Those children, from the day they were born, they lived under genocidal rule. Do you think they will have a childhood? Do you think they will get a treatment of the trauma? And I'm not even talking about their parents. So this is very sadistic and very traumatic and never happened before in the same way. It's also the most democratic genocide. What do I mean by that? Tel Aviv University, in the month March and April of year 2024, did a poll. The question was very simple. And by the way, no Palestinian need answer, because they didn't ask Palestinians. They only asked Jews in Israel. Do you consider what we are doing in Gaza just right in terms of violence? In other words, just the right amount of violence? just too much violence or too little violence? This was the question. And the answers combining just right and too little violence were 97% of Israeli Jews. Even the most barbaric communist regime has not achieved 97% of the population voting for something that it has ever done. So 97% of Jews thought that not only is it just right, but actually the majority of them thought it's not enough. And we need more violence in Gaza. 97%. You cannot be more democratic than that. Now, this is the opposite of classic genocides. Classic genocides were kept as a secret. They were made, the whole machinery of destroying people in the Holocaust, not just Jews, just never forget that Jews were a minority of people dying in the Holocaust, about 6 million, when we talk about probably 20 million. But leave that to aside. In Auschwitz, where both my parents survived, only less than 200 SS members were involved in the destruction process. 200. And every day, they killed 20,000 people. So this is a modern genocide. It's a technological genocide. It's actually very cheap. The gas was cheap. The money that was taken from the Jews financed the process. It was one of the cheapest genocides ever. The Gaza genocide is the most expensive genocide ever. It already cost just the United States more than 22 billion. Okay? I'm not even sure how much it cost Israel. But the most important thing is hundreds of thousands of Israelis were involved. Israel put more than 300,000 soldiers into Gaza. So this is not few hundred people in the SS, either poisoning people with gas or shooting people on the head. But this is hundreds of thousands of Israeli men and women doing the killing. So it's not only democratic, but it's actually popular. It's a popular genocide. It's obviously consensual. With the 97%, it is a consensual genocide. Do you know about another genocide that was totally consensual? It's also the most hated one by people around the world. Never before did so many people come out into the streets to protest against anything. It's also the most destructive genocide. The Nazis may have killed people. They didn't destroy their homes. They didn't destroy the schools. They didn't destroy the hospitals. Just to tell you one small thing, there was a very modern Jewish hospital in Berlin, would you believe it, that stayed open throughout the Second World War. Okay, it was built in 1930. It was only closed in 1946. It was open throughout the genocide, and Jews were coming to and being treated in this Berlin hospital throughout the war. Now, could this happen in Gaza? Sorry, I've lost my... So, to end, it was also, when I said it was the most expensive genocide, the most expensive genocide before Gaza was Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You may have read the few books that came out last year and the year before about it, and some films were made like Oppenheimer. I suggest reading them, and you will learn from Oppenheimer, the book and the film, that the program to build the bombs, and this was thousands of people working on it, cost $2 billion. I told you what the Gaza thing cost. It was the most comprehensive genocide. Herbicide, domicide, medicide, scholasticide. I could go on, I haven't got the time. Everything was destroyed, total destruction. And the most personalized and targeted genocide. Never before did we have a genocide where the AI allowed you to find this doctor, this journalist, to kill them with all their family and all their neighbors as punishment for being human. And to end the description, I want to say this is the only genocide I know about that the people involved are proud enough to share it on social media with millions of people they have never met by saying, showing us a university or a school they are blowing up and saying, my dear wife, for your holiday, or my dear son, for your birthday, I'm blowing this up for you in your name. And is this Jewish? Is genocide Jewish? Did the Jews ever create a genocide before? Is colonialism Jewish? Is it part of Jewish tradition? Now, why am I telling you this? Because I started with a very nice story about life together, about democracy 1,000 years ago, about the abilities to work culturally, scientifically, artistically, in a way which is amazing for Christians, Jews, and Muslims. And now I'm asking myself and I'm asking you, and I have supported one state for 35 years. I've written about it 30 years ago or more. And throughout this, I had no doubt, and I still have no doubt, that this is the only solution, this is the only just solution, only logical solution, and only moral and legal solution. Do we say to Palestinians, do you say to Palestinians, go and live with your genociders? And to end my presentation, I want to talk about what it means very briefly. There are 7.5 million Israeli Jews and 14 million Palestinians, not all of them in Palestine, of course, but half of them are in Palestine. There are more Palestinians than Israeli Jews in Palestine. You all know that. I don't need to prove it to you. So the most, if our solutions work, in the fullness of time, Jews could only be a third of the people in Palestine. If the Palestinian state will allow return, and of course we are only talking about a Palestinian state will not allow return, but welcome and enable it. Are we actually saying that anything less than a total banning of any form of Zionism, supremacism, racism, and any hatred towards the other is allowed in a country like that? Because if it isn't, then what do we do about not probably 7.5 million Jewish people living there, but how do we actually say to them now, and we need to do that, we need to say to them today, or we need to say to them in the next years that the one-state solution is discussed by all of us and many others. Israelis, the Palestinians were very generous to you, always were generous with you. They allowed you terrible things that they shouldn't have allowed you. And now this is off. this ends. This is where it ends. We need to tell Israeli Jews, if you want to have a chance to live in Palestine as a Palestinian in peace and in equality, you have to understand that Zionism is a crime against humanity, and there is no way you could be connected to it in any manner. And also that there is no bilateral nationality. There's only one nationality in Palestine, and it is Palestinian. And that Palestinian nationality is open, democratic, open to everyone from wherever they are. If they're Christians or Muslims, it doesn't matter. They don't have to have any religion. But one thing they cannot do is support any form of Zionism. Thank you very much.